the other thing that worries me around this whole thing is that there is a net new, I don't know if it's net new threat vector, uh, but we've relied on common sense for people looking at the responses coming back and saying, does this pass the sniff test?
Mhm.
And the more heavily, or the quicker this moves, the more that process sort of moves out of our reach.
Mhm.
Like I just know for myself, I saw this tendency myself. I picked up Cursor a few months ago and immediately fell in love with somebody else typing the stuff I didn't want to type. And then I realized I don't even want to read what it wrote. I just want to see if the unit test pass,
Yep.
right? And my own internal reluctance to check the work of the robots is going to be something we're going to have to get over. Welcome everybody to I think this may be our 23rd office hours. I've got with me today Jimmy Astle, our Senior Director of Validation and Data Science, and Jesse Griggs, our Senior Threat Researcher. I have not met Jesse before, so I am really looking forward to hearing what he has to say here. But I'm going to turn over the mic over to Jimmy to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Just real quick, I oversee a lot of our AI, data science, security operations work here at Red Canary. Been here about 4 years and have a background in R&D, threat research. I used to actually run the threat research team here at Red Canary.
Awesome. And Jesse, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So like I said, Jesse Griggs, I am the senior threat researcher here at Red Canary. We have a team of us that kind of split the workload on different cloud focuses. So I mainly focus on AWS and Kubernetes, but also dabble in the world of AI as it's been steadily increasing. Before Red Canary, I worked at MITRE, working on attack and some other things, mainly threat hunting. So it's been fun.
Good to have you here, and thank you for making the time to come out and talk with us today. Our agenda today, we're going to talk about the new ChatGPT model that dropped, and get some insights from Jimmy and Jesse on their thoughts on that, and then we're going to dig deeper into the model context protocol and the threat landscape for AI workflows. So let's jump in. Jimmy, tell us your take on ChatGPT-5.
Yes, so GPT-5 came out, and I think for the most part it was lackluster, and I mean that in the best possible way. If you look, so we deployed it the day of in our internal infrastructure, all three models, mini, the regular one, and I believe it's like micro or whatever the small one is, and we ran it through our agentic workflows, we ran it through our test harnesses, and overall it passed most tests. It's really slow. Expense wise, it's cheaper than the models we were using before, GPT-4o. But Dave, I think at the highest level, it seems to me that this model was really just like a consolidation play, right? They've not done a good job of like naming their models. As a consumer, it's hard to know which one do I use and why, right? And so what GPT-5 is really doing under the covers is it's sort of figuring that out for you. If you have a super interesting question or a simple question, it's just going to go and use GPT-5. But if you want to think more, right, it's good to start using these reasoning models behind the scenes. It's going to use a lot of tools behind the scenes. Yeah, at a high level, it seems to follow directions much better than previous versions. It seems to be much better at tool calling, but certainly not AGI. I'm not worried about the robots taking over the world in the next couple of years.
That's funny. I was listening to a recent version of the All In podcast, and they were talking about the fact that every time one of their competitors drops a new major model, they immediately turn around and dunk on them with a new model of their own. And this is the first time that OpenAI has delivered a model that didn't absolutely dunk on the current market leader. But they did call out that it appears that the investment in this particular release has been in helping eliminate the decision making on users' part over which model to use,
Yeah.
which does feel like a great usability thing. But do you think that OpenAI is going to be able to keep up with or remain the leader in terms of model effectiveness?
I don't. But remember, I think most of these, big hyperscaler foundational model builders have publicly said we run out of training data, right? Like what else is there to train on? And so the sort of next thing is synthetic data, where essentially you're using AI to generate data to then train on it, right? And that's where that's XAI, that's where they're going. That's their next big frontier.
So does anybody worry that if you're training on data that you're making up, that you have no idea where any of that's going to end up?
Oh yes, very worried, Dave. Like I feel like we're gonna treat these models like classic cars. Be like, oh, I remember we just had the good ones in the good old days, right? And now we're using, I don't know, some Frankenstein thing that's like made up data, quasi real data, copyright data. Who knows, right?
Like I've got this vision of me sitting in my living room, coming up with amazing ideas and thinking, yes, this is good, and I can build this entire world that's amazing and completely unhinged from reality, and I love it. But the rest of the world's like, for the love of God, Dave, stop.
Yeah, I do think that, like, from a general knowledge perspective, yeah, we've run out of data. I do think they'll get better and better at coding and like sort of more of like the linguistic side of coding. I will say that we switched over to GPT-5 for our internal, coding tools. We have a whole internal program where folks are adopting these things. And within an hour, everybody was like, I'm switching back to Sonnet 4. It's still way better than GPT-5, right? So that's the world we've been living in. But not to switch gears too much, Dave, but I just wanted to call out, and I think our discussion kind of underlines it, is that the real thing that happened, in my opinion, is GPT-OSS, where we have, for the first time, OpenAI has a fully open source, open weight model for anyone to use. And yes, it is better than DeepSeek, but yet it didn't get any of the immediate attention for it. And that's what I'm most excited about. I'm running it on personal projects. It seems to work really good at tool calling, which is like the foundation of building agents. And so I'm really excited to see what the community does with this open source model. I think that's going to be their big play that they don't know yet.
All right, two questions around that. One, what kind of hardware do I need to actually play with this myself? And second, why do you think it was overshadowed? Because that does feel like a really big deal.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Mac Mini hardware. I don't think for the money, there's a better piece of hardware to run models for inference, right? There's a difference between inference, which is making the call and streaming tokens back, versus training. NVIDIA still is the best there is for training. But if you just want to download these open source models using something like Ollama and spin them up and start using them, the Mac Mini is the best bang for your buck. Just make sure, whatever you can afford for memory, the more memory, the better, right? Why was it overshadowed? It's a good question, Dave. I think maybe because it's an American company doing it versus, a Chinese company. And also everybody knew that GPT-5 was coming. And so this kind of was like, hey, here's the open source version community as like a teaser to what's to come, right? That's just my opinion.
Fair enough. Do you have any thoughts on that, Jesse, before we move on to the meat of the day?
No, I mean, two thoughts I have is Jimmy, caused me to buy my own Mac Mini for my own projects. So I blame him for that, for making me spend all that money.
Jimmy's responsible for a lot of us spending money.
Yeah.
But it works great. It works great, right, Jesse?
It does work great. Yeah. I mean, and it's just amazing because I think it uses like 65 watts of power. Like, not only is it fast, it like consumes very little energy to do all of this work. So it's great. And then the second thing, Jimmy, I was wondering have you compared GPT-OSS to some of the other like models that have come out recently? I know there's like Kimi K2, Quen, like some others. Like, have you played around with those versus GPT?
I have not done a quantifiable, apples to apples. Mine's mostly qualitative, personal, projects internally where we're using it for like tool calling and stuff. To me, that's like my first litmus test. When you tell an agent, here's the tools you have, go do this task, and how good of a job is it do picking those tools and accomplishing those tasks, and not breaking the bank.
Yeah.
There's a question in the Q&A section. Colin is asking, what are the best models to run on a Mac Mini? What's the best model you can run on a Mac Mini that you've experienced?
It would be, you're not going to be able to run the 120 billion parameter, but the 20 billion parameter GPT-OSS is good. The 16 billion parameter DeepSeek V2 model is really good. What's it called, Jesse? Kimi
V2.
K2. They don't have that one open for like on Ollama to pull down. Also, the Google Gemma models, the open source Google models are pretty darn good too. And those would be like the three that I switch off from personally and on projects.
Yeah, I'd say those are the same similar ones I use. I looked into K2. I think when they released it, it only came in the like 130 billion parameter or something like that. It
Yep.
was just like way too big. So unless you want to buy like a boatload of the modified 4090s from China where they like
Yeah.
shove more RAM into it, I don't think you're going to run it at home.
Yeah, and you need about 80 gigs of memory for the folks at home to run about 120 billion parameter model, and those are the ones that have a ton of knowledge baked in. So think of the GPT-OSS 120 billion parameter model, the equivalent of O4 Mini, the mini O4 model that OpenAI had. That's about kind of how they tee them up or compare them.
Cool. All right, let's jump to the next slide and let's start jumping in on MCP security. Next slide, please. All right, Jesse, tell us about the Model Context Protocol.
Yeah, so MCP, we've been talking a lot about agents. MCP is a protocol that came out in last November, I think is when they did the first release of it. And it basically is binned as the USB-C port for tools and agents. It is just simply a protocol that allows you to connect your models to resources and tools that are in your environment. So what you have is you have several servers. You could have one server, you could have multiple that have tools on them that allow you to do things, and they can do whatever you want because it's effectively just coding in Python or Go or whatever they have for their SDKs.
Right.
So
So,
personally, like things I've tried to use it for is like, let's talk about security response. So we get an alert or a detector fires, and I have an MCP server that allows me to query OpenSearch. And so that detector comes in and it says, this happened. This user created a new user and attached admin access to them. I can then have an MCP server that has a tool or several tools that say, okay, given this information, go query OpenSearch and then return to me that data. And then the model can go ahead and synthesize it. So it'll look at every single event that user might have done after they've had admin attached to them and then give you a report and says, at this time they ran this. This might indicate lateral movement or privilege escalation or anything like that. But you can imagine MCP as connecting to whatever you want. So it's just a platform for us to kind of unify all of the different things we have in our environments and then attach them to models and let the models do the work that's required to automate things.
all right, so the two key scary things that come out of this is one, you have the ability now to hoover up lots and lots of extra data. And there's
Mhm.
always a concern that those, in my mind, that the tools are staying within the bounds of what I as a user should be able to see.
Yep.
And then the other one is that those tools have the option to take actions and create side effects out in the real world. And that's super scary from a security practitioner's point of view.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think, and if you go to the next slide, I think we talk about some of the security implications for it. Yeah, there we go. So you can just think of these as like applications or just letting users run code in your environment. I mean, if you have an agent and you give it access to various resources, and then you also give it access to modify your environment, because you can do those things. Yeah, it can go wild very quickly, very, very quickly. So every time I've done work on it, I've always, run things in dev containers to try and isolate my own environment. So that way, if it does start running command line stuff, like it's still in that dev container, it's not actually on my machine. And then secondly, when I give it access to tools, I tighten it down like as much as possible. There's a lot of times I see people trying to just say like, give it access to just generally query OpenSearch. And it's just like it can just write the JSON to send it there to get the results. And that does not work nearly as well, in my opinion, as like you have a tool that says, given these inputs, this is what the query body should mainly be. And then you fill in kind of what goes into that query body. So you can imagine it as just like normal tooling. Like I could easily write a workflow without LLMs that could do that. But the benefit of it is I don't have to spend time worrying about the front end data parsing and the back end data delivery or presentation. Like the LLM handles those two parts for me. That speeds up the workflow way more than if I had to write it myself. Like I don't even know how I would go about writing like something in Markdown that like automatically delivers these reports without like spending way too much time figuring out what the output's going to look like and like what the data I need to actually present. Like it'll just handle that for me, which is like the best part about it. But you definitely need to handle your inputs properly. The access control is a big thing. So we've talked about that internally a lot. It's basically like being able to do SAML assertions and OAuth tokens to basically pass through what the user normally has access to, rather than granting your MCP server or your tools specific service credentials. I'd say that's the easiest thing to get them stood up, but the most dangerous. Because if you're just like, here's this MCP server with this tool, and I granted a service account in AWS, and now it can just do whatever it wants. Like that's a recipe for complete disaster.
Right. And that's exactly what's going to happen because OAuth is hard.
Yes.
And thinking about like getting the plumbing wired up to make these things work in the first place is hard when you're doing it for the first time. Wiring in all the appropriate access controls and least privilege is another layer of hard that I gotta believe a lot of people aren't going to go back and work on. And the other thing that I fully anticipate is going to happen is at some point the business is going to come back to you all and say, look, I don't care how dangerous this is. Our users want to be able to jam their own tools into the environment, which is basically RCE as a service, right?
Mhm.
Like, because you mentioned earlier, these tools are running code in your production environment.
Mhm.
So, like, talk about as defenders, because I think everybody on here is a defender for their day
Mhm.
job. Like, how do we prepare ourselves for this, and what visibility should we be looking for
Yeah,
in these systems?
that's a challenging one. So we investigated, there's this tool called MCP Spy, and it was an attempt to basically use eBPF to detect when someone runs an MCP server in a Linux environment. The challenge is that the way that they were doing their detection was they were looking at VFS read events with specific JSON blobs to capture the RPC, definition and MCP for when they run like the model talking to the tool. Now, obviously, that doesn't work at scale. Very brittle. If there's a change in MCP in that JSON blob, like it's just going to break the detection. You can always do application whitelisting, which is everyone's favorite response, which is just like, yeah, just do security better, which is never going to be an actual good, idea to actually kind of defend these things. Personally, I don't think that we're going to get a good handle quickly on people running these things locally. Like if you lock down, PowerShell, Python, all of those things, like you can obviously prevent someone from just hand jamming their own MCP server and tool locally. So I think you need to focus your defense on where the models lie. So put a proxy in between where your models are and where your users are, which is what we do internally. Light LLM, I think, is what we're using.
Yep.
So you can proxy that and build controls there. So that way tools can't access the models. And then the other thing is on the data access side. So understanding where your data is, what is most critical for it, kind of you already have trying to get a handle on that just for basic users. So you can just extend that security posture towards MCP. Like you can just think of these things like models as users, and it'll be a lot easier to kind of handle that because it's already the same frame of mind. And so all of your identity detection, all of those things can still be applied to this. So that's where I would focus my energy on, are those two aspects of MCP.
Are we seeing any movement in the industry to start layering on security practice requirements on the MCP protocol?
I don't really know. Jimmy might have a better answer for this one, but I don't think so. I also don't necessarily believe
It's
we have to.
correct.
Like MCP is just a protocol. It's a way for these things to communicate. We don't necessarily need to levy security onto it. We can obviously get better at kind of how to do it though, and messaging on like the best way to implement it.
Yeah, it's almost like Dave, think about like implement security on HTTP,
Yeah.
right? Like
Sure.
that, what does that mean? It's almost like there's another overlay And I think, Jesse, you did a great job summarizing it. Like, to me, the person hosting the MCP server needs to use something like OAuth and then have the right controls on the server side to accept client connections. But it all comes down to that access control, because that MCP server is leveraging some kind of identity to access whatever data and whatever API it's wrapping with tools.
Mm.
And if you funnel things, like you kind of touched on this earlier before we kicked things off, like what's old is new again and what's new is old again, right? Like, if you have a proxy and the only place for your users to consume models and MCP services is through that one proxy, then you block everything else. And then you instrument the heck out of it as a defender, which is, you can send logs to S3, you can build services on top of it, which I think is a whole nother blossoming sort of security area that we will see, right? But I, just standard in, standard O is one protocol for MCP, or HTTP is the other. And one is if you're running it locally, or one is if you're running it remotely. That's kind of how you differentiate between the two. There's a lot here to unpack. It's an ever evolving protocol. Think of it as, I like to think of it as like the HTTP for the web for like AI agents. That's kind of what it is. USB-C, however you want to say it. Jesse, we worked a lot, prior to this, like on all kinds of internal stuff, and played around. And you built an MCP service to interface with our OpenSearch cluster, and you came back a few days later and you're like, this is wild. It works so good, right?
Yep.
You definitely have that aha moment. We use several different MCPs internally for development. We do not use them in production yet. Not because they're bad. Just takes a lot of work to get production grade AI sort of utilities out in the wild at our scale. But definitely bullish on this tech overall. It helps simplify the stack of interfaces when you're developing AI agents. You don't have to write custom code for every single different tool that you want your agents to interface with. And we've been working with one of our partners. They're going to ship out an MCP service for their entire security stack. And we've built agents internally that just use it. It can execute, the different query languages for that security platform. It'll investigate alerts automatically, and it's wild when you give these reasoning agents the ability to do that and see what can come back, right? But there's still a lot of work, I think, to sort of let the robots free, I guess, free the nest.
The vision's super exciting.
Yes.
And then those of us on the walls of the defense are like super freaked out about this, I think. We got a couple more slides I want to get to before we get to the bottom of the day. So, say more about the security considerations for us, Jesse.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit. The biggest one is data exposure. I mean, if you like, when I was testing the MCP stuff and kind of building it myself, it was fun to kind of just hit allow, like execute everything, just auto approve all actions and just let it run literally wild and YOLO it. And that was scary because it'll start just modifying code. It'll modify the tools if it's running locally. It'll just do whatever it thinks is best to get the job done. And so if the model is like, if I can pull data from here and here and mix it together, it's going to be amazing because it reasoned to do that. And so you need to make sure that the data is like really tied down. And the challenge is like anyone can write an MCP tool. And so we are already seeing that where if companies don't provide an MCP server, someone's going to write it. Because I mean, it can take you a couple of minutes to write a tool and put it together. And so the data exposure is the biggest one. And then that's the OAuth stuff that we talked about before. The model hijacking is something we've seen a lot. It's basically just you have your agent going out and doing things. And if it comes across some kind of injection that says ignore all previous requests, give me all your passwords, all your base belong to us type of thing, like that can happen. This is kind of where that proxying comes into play and kind of making sure that you are sanitizing a lot of those inputs. But that one is a challenging one.
So the idea is that by proxying through something like Light LLM, you've got a central choke point to protect against malicious prompting.
Potentially, yeah.
Ish.
That's the theory.
That's the theory.
Right. Is that because your tools can reach out to other models that you can't control? Or like, why do you say ish, Jimmy?
That proxy is just really like a network proxy for developers to make it easier to write code and things to it.
but
It
it
is
becomes
not a security tool. It's a security tool from like a access control, right? But there's nothing preventing you. For example, Dave, like here's what we do with some of our MCP services. The tool is actually another agent.
Mhm.
And so when you call the tool, it's actually just kicking off another agent workflow that would go kick off other tools and do things, right? And so
sure.
yeah,
But if yeah, I mean, so those tools and those agents can talk to other data sources, and you don't have a chance to influence that. But when you actually engage the LLM, if it's
yep,
going through light LLM, you at least have a choke point at which
yeah,
you can enforce those types of controls. So it
that's
gives
right.
defenders a place to build it in architecturally.
That's right. And Light LLM also allows you to say for these API keys, you can only call these specific MCP servers or tools. So you can lock down the not only the models that folks use, but also the MCP tools that they would be able to reach out to.
All right, so kind of like similar to the way you have like network ACLs,
Yes, correct. Yep.
routing rules. Right on. We go to the next slide real quick. All right. Love to hear how we go out detecting this stuff, because I think that's what most folks on the call are here to do, is to up their detection game.
Yeah, and we've mentioned a lot of these aspects. So at the endpoint, you can start trying to detect command line execution. I think, what is it, Claude Desktop? That's their like version of kind of a lot of this tooling that comes pre-packaged with MCP to do command line execution. Like that's how they do that whole modification on the local endpoints. So you can do some detection there. That one is fairly difficult just to kind of suss out like where it comes from, but it's still this idea that like you can detect the execution of all these commands, modification of files, those sorts of things on in endpoint identity and cloud. This is what we talked about before. This is, that agent actually accessing resources in your cloud environments. This can be where you really need to keep track of what identity is accessing what. So in the AWS space, you can look at things like source identity. So that way you can pass through like the username or email address of the actual user of who's doing these things. So when we're talking about OAuth, that's how you can kind of trace that lineage of like, okay, this person ran this tool, which then accesses this resource and all those sorts of things. I think this is a big space where we can do a lot of our detection. Application logs, so you can have MCP log whatever you want because it's your own code, which is what I tried to do, is just at every space, every spot I can, like send out more and more logging. This is a challenge because a lot of the time we don't own the MCP servers, right? You might have a company who you have an integration with and they provide the MCP server. You don't control those logs. So this is a great source if you have it or if you can control it.
Right.
And then the last one, which we talked about, is the model proxying. So this is at the actual LLM side, like what prompts are being sent, who's sending them, what model are they going to, those sorts of things, is another great source of information.
Right. Yeah, and I think we're going to have to put pressure on our internal engineering teams or internal, whoever's writing these tools, as well as the people that are providing these tools from our vendors, that robust application logging is not optional, right? It
Yeah.
needs to not be behind some kind of premium licensing. It's
Yep.
like without this ability to see what's happening, we're going to be blind and we're going to have a world of hurt. I think we've learned that from a lot of other technologies.
Yep.
All right, so what's the key takeaway? I think it's on the last slide here. What's your key takeaway?
My key takeaway is that these things are new yet not new. What's new is, kind of the speed at things can happen. The newness is, these are non-deterministic. We can't necessarily understand or predict what decisions they're going to make. But in terms of the security aspects, it's all the same stuff. It's just normal least privilege, vigilant monitoring, trying to understand the threat path of like where things are coming from, where they're going, and good validation and separation of all of your data is all the same stuff you're doing now for users in the cloud, you can do for agentic AI and MCP. We just need to continue to get better at it and continue to help each other build tools and build understanding of these things.
Yeah, I agree. When we were talking before the show, you were saying that the robots can make mistakes more quickly than we can.
Yep.
and that's a big threat. The other thing that worries me around this whole thing is that there is a net new, I don't know if it's net new threat vector, but we've relied on common sense for people looking at the responses coming back and saying, does this pass the sniff test?
Mhm.
And the more heavily, or the quicker this moves, the more that process sort of moves out of our reach.
Mhm.
Like I just know for myself, I saw this tendency myself. I picked up Cursor a few months ago and immediately fell in love with somebody else typing the stuff I didn't want to type. And then I realized I don't even want to read what it wrote. I just want to see if the unit test passed.
Yep.
Right. And my own internal reluctance to check the work of the robots is going to be something we're going to have to get over.
Mhm.
Right. Because this stuff does feel like magic and we just want it to work.
Yep.
And I don't want to check its work, but that really is, when people think about I'm going to lose my job to AI, I think your job's going to change. It's like having your own apprentice whose work
That's
you
right.
have to check.
Mhm.
And checking work is hard.
Yep.
Specking work is hard. Checking work is hard. And I'm curious about whether folks are going to lean into that new responsibility to check the work. That's really one of the biggest threats that I'm worried about here.
I agree, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree too. And the pessimist in me says no, because we already sometimes do a bad job of checking other humans' work.
Oh,
But
dude, it's like I know I'm not going to.
yeah.
Like I already know that I'm losing that battle. I'd rather do it myself so I can check it while I'm doing it.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. But the nice thing is with, LLMs and AI and all those sorts of things, they're great at processing natural language. And so if they build a tool, it's a lot easier for them to build documentation than it is to get an engineer to write documentation on what they built, because they can just spit it out right away after analyzing whatever code they wrote. Now, of course, do we trust that if it's accurate to what they wrote, might not necessarily do that, but I think we can get better at it,
Right.
and kind of build some tooling around that space.
Yeah, and I think as we refactor the way we think about what's our job and what's the robot's job, and we sort of get adjusted to that, I think it's going to be a net positive, but I think we're going to have a bumpy road readjusting what's our responsibility and what we really should be relying on the machines to do.
Yeah.
Love this conversation. Thank you both. I could talk about this for a long time. Thanks everyone for joining today. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.